Well, hello and welcome to Interventional Mindset. This is Nate Radcliffe, and I'm here with Manjool Shah from Michigan. He is an assistant professor of ophthalmology. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Nate. Good to be here.
And so we're just going to have some fun chatting tonight. I'm, of course, dressed like a radio announcer, and you're dressed like a surgeon, which is appropriate because I'm going to be getting some surgical tips from you. And what we're really looking at here on the glaucoma side of interventional mindset is that we have literally been flooded with new opportunities to expand our surgical options, bring a lot of new therapies in, and to some extent it's confusing and intimidating to some of us. And so I want to get your thoughts on, we'll just jump right into it. We're going to talk a little bit about Hydrus today. Maybe tell us just a little bit about what Hydrus is, when you got started with it, and what sort of drew you to bring this technique into your surgeries.
Sure. So my first experience with Hydrus was in training for a standalone clinical trial, and shortly thereafter had the opportunity to lead it into introduction at Kellogg Eye Center shortly after FDA approval. It's been sort of a valuable addition to my glaucoma toolkit. And yeah, I agree. We're in a state of sort of choice paralysis right now. So how do we really evaluate all of these various modalities that are sort of theoretically working in the same space? It is tough for all of us to choose what's best. Early on, my journey, I kind of used Hydrus like I would any Schlemm's canal based procedure in sort of the milder glaucomas that were getting cataract surgery as well. And I've been just sort of struck by the sort of reproducible efficacy and ease of administration that's made it sort of my go-to MIGS approach in a variety of glaucomas. Certainly am doing this in combination with cataract surgery, but we're starting to push the envelope in terms of severity of disease, mechanism of disease, IOP at baseline, number of medications at baseline, and we're seeing really sort of profound results.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I'm actually thinking as you're speaking, you're bringing Hydrus into Michigan, and Michigan's got to be a tough place to get new surgeries approved, I imagine. There's probably a few committees involved.
Yeah.
But you have
50 or 60, yeah.
Yeah. You have some good data though. And I want to talk a little bit about a Horizon trial. But overall, Ivantis has had a good research program ongoing for many years, including just a clinical registry with thousands of cases that have been followed. And I guess you were the one who brought it in. So, were you able to use the studies and the FDA approval to get it on board at Michigan?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was one of the smoother approval processes, to be honest with you. And again, I think the volume and quality of data that was coming into that package really made it a smooth entry into the toolkit. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we'll get back to the data in a little bit. I don't want to put anyone who's listening asleep quite yet. So tell me about if you're a surgeon just getting started, what's your approach to this in the operating room? I mean, is there a lot that you need to do to get ready, and how does it go?
So, it's funny, we just did a wet lab for the senior residents and our fellows on Friday evening. So that's what I do on a Friday night. But, it was remarkable. The fellows, the senior residents, and we actually had a couple of junior faculty members who've kind of heard the buzz, sort of poke their heads in and try to get in on the action. And it was remarkable how easy these surgeons who don't actually have a lot of experience with MIGS were able to really quickly integrate the skills. The big thing for me is that separate incision, creating that Hydrus wound, like that 1 to 1.5 millimeter paracentesis, angled at the nasal angle about 4 clock hours away from the area of intended implantation. That is so key for a number of reasons. It not only makes it just sort of just incredibly easy from an access point of view, but you're able to work through a small incision, so you have an incredibly stable anterior chamber, to a point where this is my go-to MIGS procedure in my patients who don't have the ability to cooperate and move their eyes appropriately and participate in Schlemm's canal surgery and direct goniooscopy, which is, as we know, one of the hardest parts of Schlemm's canal surgery. So, yeah.
You know, it's a great point. And I was a few years into doing angle surgery when I realized that floppy iris isn't just a problem for cataract surgeons, it's a problem for MIGS. And, you know, you're usually coming in through your main wound, often keeping it a little bit open. And that's a great opportunity for iris to come out. And with the Hydrus incision, you're doing MIGS through a 1 millimeter incision.
Right.
And the chamber is just sort of bulletproof, tight, and it's kind of a nice, relaxing working area.
Absolutely.
And I think I've also heard you say that, you know, the fact that this is an 8 millimeter stent, the size actually sort of works in your favor. Maybe elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, having a big stent also, you know, it has memory, so you know it's going to find canal. If it's going in the right place, it's going to just go. It's going to slide right in. If it's going in the wrong place, you'll have real quick feedback, and the injector is designed to very quickly and effortlessly retract the stent, reposition, and go ahead and deploy. So you can make really quick on-the-fly adjustments with minimal time, minimal troubleshooting, etc. And again, all of this being done through a 1 millimeter incision, so you have a stable chamber and a pristine view the whole time.
Yeah, great. And have you played around with canaloplasty along with Hydrus? And you know, what are your thoughts or any ideas for surgeons who are considering that approach?
Yeah, I definitely have. I kind of lean on that more for my, you know, more advanced patients with rather high pressures on multiple medications, and folks in whom I think there is sort of a more global TM disease, my pigmentary glaucomas, my uveitis, etc. The nice thing is, you know, doing an ab interno canaloplasty requires a very small incision into Schlemm's canal. So you can use that really focal entry point to do your viscodilation and then drop a stent in the same space. And when that's done, Hydrus is, I mean, just incredibly easy, because that dilated canal just really lends itself to you know, taking that stent in.
So I've gotten a lot of questions about combining canaloplasty with Hydrus. You know, tell me about your thoughts and experience with that.
Yeah, so I've certainly used that on a handful of occasions, mainly for my patients with more advanced glaucomas or you know, higher IOPs, more sort of diffuse trabecular meshwork disease. Routinely, I'm using the LX microcatheter, the iTrack catheter, so more of an ABIC type approach. And again, the nice thing is we're making a really, really focal entry into Schlemm's canal, and we can use the same entry both for the ab interno canaloplasty as well as the Hydrus implantation. So it's very synergistic.
Gotcha. So you'll just use the Hydrus incision for the AVIC as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
I wanted to get some of your thoughts on the large research program that Ivantis has brought to glaucoma. And the Horizon study is really the flagship study. This is phaco compared to phaco plus stent, largest of the stent trials, and now out to 4 years.
Yeah.
The 2-year data, we saw, again, washed out 2-year data, 77% of those getting Hydrus plus phaco hitting that 20% IOP reduction compared to only 57% of phaco alone. And we also saw big changes in terms of washed out pressure, 7.6 millimeters at 2 years with Hydrus compared to only 5.3 millimeters washed out, you know, with phaco alone.
Right.
So any initial thoughts on just the preliminary data from the Horizon study?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing power here. We're seeing power unlike we've seen in our other Schlemm's canal interventions, I think, at this point. And we're seeing durability of effect, which we haven't necessarily seen in previous clinical trials. So that's exciting and perhaps even surprising on some level that the curves aren't drifting towards each other. We're not seeing a regression of effect over time, per se.
And so I think looking at the percentage of patients who are going med-free out to even 48 months, we know glaucoma tends to get a little worse over time. And, we do see a slight decrease in percentage of patients year to year who can stay off drops. Sure. But when you actually look at how Hydrus plus phaco does compared to just phaco alone, you see more people drifting back onto drops. And so that advantage stays very stable. Mm-hmm. Here we had, even at 48 months, 65% of those with Hydrus still off drops compared to only 41% with phaco alone. There are some other things that are kind of interesting from this study. And one is this secondary surgical intervention. And mm-hmm. in 2 years, they started to see a separation of people who needed a trab, a tube shunt, or a ciliary ablative procedure. But out at 4 years, 6% of those getting a phaco who had glaucoma needed incisional glaucoma surgery compared to only 2% of those getting the Hydrus. What do you think about this?
No, that's remarkable. I mean, I think it goes to show a couple things. First of all, these are mild to moderate patients at entry, so we can't necessarily look at a patient and know, in 3 years you're going to need a trab. We just don't have that power yet. Maybe we will one day, but we don't. And so there's something to be said for sort of using the best bullet in your gun today when you have that opportunity to do so. 6% versus 2% is just remarkable. And I think it probably speaks to the fact that we're not only achieving, meaningful IOP reduction, sort of quantitative reductions in pressures as has been demonstrated, but the fact that we're doing it without medications suggests that we're sort of building solutions into the eye, kind of reconfiguring the physiology to make it a better kind of quality of pressure management over time. And I got to imagine that over time has a profound effect. We see similar type deviations in things like the light trial, for example, where even though the pressure is relatively similar between the two groups, there's a very clear distinction between surgical intervention. So we're talking about more than just IOP, even though IOP in the Horizon trial is very, very clearly separated between the groups.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the light trial, because this result reminds me of that study as well. And that is that there's probably a lot more to the quality of pressure reduction, even when some of the numbers seem similar. And of course, patients were still treated if they had an elevated pressure in both Horizon and in light, but you still saw that treatments to the trabecular meshwork, whether it was laser, or Hydrus, could make a difference in terms of who went on to get surgery. And again, the light trial was very early glaucoma or ocular hypertension initially treated. 3% of those patients needed surgery within 3 years. And here, the same thing. And, they did go back and look at all the visual field, the baseline pressure, and the people who needed surgery didn't look any different.
Right.
So that, to me, it is a compelling argument for two things. For one is if you're just offering cataract surgery and you're saying, I don't think I need to bring a stent to my practice, recognizing that helping a patient avoid glaucoma surgery is a huge benefit. And when I see a new glaucoma patient, I say, I don't want you to go blind, and I really like to help you avoid needing glaucoma surgery. And this is one of the ways I'm going to do that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So very compelling data there. And then finally, just really good safety now out to 4 years. And I'll tell you the endothelial cell density data. There are a couple of points to it. One is that we have it, and we have it out to 4 years.
Yeah.
And really, although the cataract surgery and cataract with stent both did lose, this sort of 12-13% range endothelial cell count from the surgery. From that point on, from 3 months after on, they both really maintained similar and stable rates of endothelial cell.
Absolutely. And, honestly, looking at the data doesn't surprise me. Just thinking about the profile of the stent, the way it sits in the eye and the way you place it, you should be parallel to the trabecular meshwork. You're not engaging in peripheral corneal tissue. Just because it's an 8mm stent doesn't, in my mind, make it any more of a concern. And again, I think there's value in that larger stent in terms of keeping it in place, making sure it's doing its job, and keeping that orientation in a safe manner.
We've had this discussion, with a smaller, type of procedure, and I'll say even with a smaller stent, it's sort of more possible to put it in the wrong location, simply because you don't have that much information or feedback. But we know what it feels like if you're putting Hydrus in and the canals collapse, and you won't be able to put it in any further. It sort of forces you during the procedure to back out and get it in the perfect place. Right. And I will say, for my stents, that I'm usually pretty certain that I'm in exactly the right spot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's definitely an advantage.
Yeah.
All right. So, I did say we'd say a few words about the COMPARE study.
Yeah.
It really had a lot of sort of similar kinds of information. This was a different patient population. So we had patients who were really pressures between 23 now and 39. This is an off-label study, we should say, who were randomized in the operating room to either one Hydrus or two iStent Generation 1s, no phaco. And Ike Ahmed was the chief investigator. And really, sort of your standard glaucoma patients, about 6 decibels of loss. The pressures were about 19 on 2.5 or maybe even more medicines, with washout pressures really at 27.5 or so for both groups. Again, followed up to 2 years. I just have to hand it to Ivantis for doing this trial. What can you tell me about what we saw here?
So a couple of things, just looking at it in terms of technique that I appreciated. These weren't just, blind iStent insertions. These were, there was a particular mention of an attempt to target iStent placement to those sort of focal areas of collector channels, pigment in the trabecular meshwork, focal heme reflux. So really trying to elevate the game in terms of iStent insertion beyond what we saw in the initial IDE trials published, now almost 10 years ago. So really, maximizing our iStent approach. And nevertheless, we see some interesting data for sure. I mean, again, from an IOP standpoint, the end result is pretty similar. Both groups end up with a fairly similar pressure reduction. However, where the curves separate is the number of medications needed to achieve said pressure. And when I think about Schlemm's canal surgery, there is a physiologic floor. So we're going to get to that floor potentially one way or the other, whether it's with the stent alone or with the stent plus meds. This is not a trabeculectomy where you can get to a nice bagel. This is sort of bounded. So we have a really clean way of sort of dividing these groups, but our endpoints have to be a little different. We have to look at medication utilization as opposed to pure IOP.
It's a great point, and I can go over some of those numbers, but with the Hydrus, 38% were able to get off meds, and 18.7% of those with the 2 stents. Similar numbers of patients were on 1 med or 2 med, but then when you jump up to the 3 or more med category, which we might call kind of the failures, we had fewer Hydrus patients on 3 or more meds, only 18%, compared to the stents, 33%. So there was a redistribution of med use in favor of being on fewer or no meds with Hydrus compared to the 2 stents. And I think it's funny that you bring up the concept of targeting, which of course we're hearing a little less about now, partially because we have things like Hydrus, where you don't need to target; you're going to get a third of the angle. Just out of the gate. And to the credit of 360 canaloplasty and large 90 to 120 degree goniotomies, it's just MIGS has sort of reached out in terms of number of collector channels addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and sort of similar findings in terms of secondary surgical interventions as well, which was also compelling and sort of speaks again to that idea of building in more IOP regulation and sort of capacity for maintenance of pressure fluctuations, perhaps with a more robust stent, as compared to the iStent group. And in fact, when they again looked retrospectively at entry data, the only thing they could determine that was predictive of not needing a secondary surgical intervention was getting randomized to Hydrus.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And again, now maybe in this group, not a surprise that they would need a second surgery.
Right.
We talk a lot about, and I know you and I think about this all day, risk benefit. And when you're consenting a patient, okay, here's the benefits, but this is the price you're paying. But with the safety, profile was similar to phaco. There were some PAS in the Hydrus arm, but I don't know that PAS or should be considered even a safety issue, as they're asymptomatic. And it's pretty compelling if you can get a reduction in the need for a real glaucoma surgery without a major safety penalty. Pretty compelling.
Pretty easy. And furthermore, I believe 100% of the Hydrus stents were successfully implanted, and it was a little shy of that in the iStent group. I think there were a few patients for whom they weren't able to get a second stent in.
Gotcha.
So it was something like 94, 95%. So again, not huge, but speaks to speaks to concerns about, it's a big stent, it's a new device. Granted, these were very experienced surgeons, but it's exceedingly achievable, and it's just reproducible, and there's a lot of confidence in placement when you know where you're at.
Yep, and I'm looking over the rest of the safety information here in the COMPARE trial, and really, just being fair, there's 4% hyphema with Hydrus, 1.3 with the iStents, but there's a few more lines of, 2-line loss with iStent compared to Hydrus, 11.7 compared to 6.7. I'm not sure I believe, any of those are, that much different, in my experience between the two surgeries. And the rest of the numbers are really all the same. So, so and again, and I know we have more data coming, from Ivantis, and we'll just sort of have to sit and wait. Yeah. There is a large registry out there as well, and I know initially when the whole issue with the CyPass and endothelial cell loss came out, it was reassuring to look at that registry and know there were not patients needing corneal transplants even 4 or 5 years after, after they had their surgery here with Hydrus. So, Well, we'll look forward to learning more about this in the future. Thank you for joining me here and talking a little bit about glaucoma surgery.
Thanks, man. Great to be here. I could do this all day with you, man.
Any final words of advice for a surgeon who maybe has done one type of MIGS, but hasn't sort of brought anything else in?
Yeah. Well, if you've done one type of MIGS, then you've already kind of unlocked the hardest part of the whole experience, which is a mindset. Integrating new devices and new techniques into your toolkit that's the easy part, and quite frankly, that's the fun part. Each of these devices provide unique values, and it's our sort of responsibility to kind of evaluate them and choose what's best for our patients. But again, if you can do one, you can do many.
Yeah, I love that advice, and for me, it's like it's always the same, no matter what you're talking about. It's call your rep. If you don't know your rep, find the surgeon who does it and ask them who their rep is.
Yeah.
There's almost always some sort of online click through, or maybe even a wet lab training. And then I find like it's just a ton of variability. For if a surgeon wants a lot of hand holding, they're going to get it from the company. And if some are a little bit more standoff, and usually the company's sort of obligated to take you through a few things. But you can sort of fly at your own pace from there. So just taking that step and getting people to start interacting with sort of a good way to do it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you helping us out here with interventional mindset. And hopefully, we'll have more opportunities to interact on this platform in the future.
Thanks a bunch.
Yeah. Thanks.